inspiring large-scale change with innovations driven by empathy. As the head of Center for Rehabilitation, Engineering and Assistive Technology, Professor Anil Prabhakar says that a lot of his research is driven by a simple human quality we call empathy. You look around and see that we are always aiming for the stars, but you don't want to leave people behind. You genuinely want to address the needs of everyone since every individual counts. You pick up a problem and aim to solve it in the best way possible. A faculty member at Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, since 2002, Professor Prabhakar has spent the best part of 2 decades driving cutting-edge innovation and research in the field of assistive technology and quantum science and technology. His research has generated incredible results. From developing a non-contact switch for persons with cerebral palsy so that they can use a computer mouse, to a wheelchair-accessible electric vehicle and wearable devices for persons with hearing and motor disabilities. None of this research and innovation happens without the foundation set by empathy. In fact, one could argue that some of the best innovations in India are built on the same foundation. Take the example of Vaibhav Tidke, co-founder of S4S Technologies, a Mumbai-based startup best known for their globally renowned and patented solar conduction dryer, or SCD. This device is essentially a solar-powered food dehydrator that reduces moisture content in agro-produce, preserving it for up to 1 year without using any chemicals and preservatives. As a child growing up in rural Maharashtra in a family of farmers, Vaibhav recalls how he often saw fresh farm produce go to waste due to the lack of proper storage options. Underlying the development of the solar conduction dryer, or SCD, was empathy for farmers struggling to sell their produce because they lacked proper storage options. Speaking to the Better India, he recalls, "We had a weekly bazaar near my house. By evening, the farmers would be forced to sell their vegetables at cheaper prices or let their produce go to waste. I realized that there were many issues that affected farmers. Studying engineering gave me the knowledge to understand those and devise solutions." Meanwhile, like many Indians, Kedar Kulkarni, co-founder of Pune-based venture Rutu Biosystems, was struck by the sickening stench emanating from public washrooms. Given how his father Mohan Kulkarni had developed a unique technology to neutralize odor in garbage dumping grounds, Kedar thought about whether they could do the same for public urinals. So they developed a unique but simple solution that not only addressed the odor problem but also conserved water in a significant way. Kedar says, "The way the urinals are built is itself a problem. The uric salt in urine gets deposited in the drain line, which then comes in contact with water. It reacts and releases ammonia gas. This can be treated using our products that not only cancel out odor, but also conserve water." After all, it's ordinary Indians who largely use public urinals. What Kedar saw was a public health and sanitation problem and developed a unique innovation to address it. Although empathy was the underlying emotion that inspired these innovations, each went on their own journey and battled different challenges in bringing them to life. Here is the story of how these 3 innovators did it. Part 1. Leave no person behind. CREATE, or CREATE, short for Center for Rehabilitation Engineering and Assistive Technology, is a multidisciplinary translational research and educational initiative of IIT Madras. In December 2021, they developed 2 interesting devices for persons with hearing and motor disabilities. According to researchers at CREATE, the 2 devices, Vibe and iGest, are embedded systems that are set to bring the latest developments from the Internet of Things and machine learning to wearable assistive devices. Such wearable devices will have rechargeable batteries and will communicate with a mobile phone over Bluetooth. More importantly, they believe that these wearable sensors will help individuals communicate independently and enhance their quality of life backed by the latest sensor technologies. Vibe is a wearable device that vibrates for acoustic sounds around a person with hearing impairment. It features a multitude of sound patterns that are recognized using a microphone and voice recognition modules. It will alert the user about a specific sound, such as a doorbell, an alarm, or a crying child, and will be compact and wearable as a watch. It is a simple way of providing vibration input for the pre-identified surrounding sounds, with each such sound corresponding to a specific vibration and blinking LEDs to alert the user. In a conversation with the Better India, Professor Anil Prabhakar says, Vibe uses a microphone and iGest uses an IMU or inertial motion unit. The microphone picks up ambient sounds and matches the pattern to one of many known sounds, for example, a doorbell. This is then converted to a vibration pattern using a micromotor. iGest, meanwhile, will function as an alternative and augmentative communication device for persons with cerebral palsy. It will recognize the gestures of those with limited motor skills and convert them into audio output through a smartphone. It aims to address issues of speech impairment and motor impairments faced by persons with cerebral palsy. iGest works as a communication device, explains Professor Prabhakar. When the user makes a gesture of the hand, the output of the IMU is sent to machine learning algorithms that classify the gesture. This classification is matched to a previously identified sentence and communicated to a mobile that then speaks on behalf of the user. Vibe and iGest have sensors with microcontrollers and fall under the umbrella of wearable, assistive, and rehabilitation devices. The project to develop both devices was conceived as researchers began interacting with non-profit organizations and inclusive schools on the needs of their students. iGest was started by students at IIT Madras in 2014, and that was before machine learning became popular. Core motivation behind Vibe and iGest: switches before devices. IIT Madras is sandwiched between two schools for children with disabilities. On one side, they have the non-profit Vidyasagar, and on the other, there is the Spastic Society of Tamil Nadu. In fact, when Professor Prabhakar joined IIT Madras as a faculty member in 2002, Vidyasagar had their vocation training center on the institute campus. But how did Professor Prabhakar get into developing technology for persons with disabilities? When I started working in the disability space, I was, in some sense, guilted into doing it. I was basically told, what good are you as an IIT professor if you can't solve simple problems? This work was always on the fringe. I was doing it because I felt I needed to do it. I decided to devote 20% of my time doing work in this space of assistive technologies. It wasn't really mainstream, he recalls. Also starting out, Professor Prabhakar realized that a lot of challenges that persons with disabilities face can be solved by electrical engineers. Here's how he describes his early days working with Vidyasagar. We were working with these kids with motor disabilities, cerebral palsy to be specific. Cerebral palsy means that many of them lack fine motor skills, so they could not control a mouse. And if you look at what you need to do on a computer, 80% of the time you are pressing the left click of a mouse. So how does someone who cannot move their finger like this use a computer? One person Professor Prabhakar was working with had very severe motor impairments. She would use a bulb switch around her neck and lean her neck on it. As he describes it, that's a pain in the neck, literally. So they wanted us to design something that was non-contact. And it was just a coincidence that I was discussing this with one of my colleagues, and he said, there's this instrument called the theremin vox, an electronic musical instrument controlled without physical contact, invented by a Russian inventor called Leon Theremin. So we repurposed that musical instrument into a non-contact switch, and it's called Aditi, which stands for Analog Digital Theremin Interface. Aditi was their first creation and, even today, remains in demand. In fact, they are currently making about 30 units of them for an inclusive quiz. I don't really want to make 500 of them because I can't distribute them so easily. I make 10, 20 or 30 units and so on, depending on the requirement. Similarly, IIT Kharagpur, in partnership with West Bengal Electronics, made a switch called the button switch, a large rigid red button that students could press with their entire arm if they had the strength. With Mindtree Foundation, we made a smiley ball, which was basically those yellow balls with a smiley face on that. Inside that ball, we would put in a switch, and then a user could press it in a way that is possible. Making these switches was very essential, he says. And we are not talking of high research. At the time, people weren't even talking about machine learning and AI. They were talking about making switches. Professor Prabhakar took a different approach. When most people would ask, what is the size of the market? How many devices? Let's plan big and change the world. His approach was, let us solve the problem for one person, and in that process you learn enough that you can solve it for 100 people maybe. Professor Prabhakar says, I don't want to forget that one person. I found my approach more gratifying and it has helped me stay the course. This was the approach when developing Vibe and iGest too. However, Vibe has received more traction than iGest. He explains, we've gone to a couple of exhibitions with prototypes and people have been testing Vibe out. For the World Day of the Deaf 2022, Sony Pictures Network put out a press release around our innovations, and that has also gotten some attention. We have been fairly successful in building algorithms for use on the devices. We are now working on prototyping them with better batteries, form factors, etc. Professor Prabhakar and his team at Create had planned for Vibe to recognize around 4 or 5 sounds initially. These include car honking, baby crying, milk cooker, doorbell, and someone's name. But when you are entering the mass market, you have to start thinking about the programming aspect of the technology. For example, how does the person program it to recognize their name? In terms of getting the technology ready and taking it to the market, what the team at Create needs is a software interface. Delving into this further, he says, one of our engineers went and stood at the corner of a busy road and collected sounds of cars honking. Now, maybe those are not among the 5 categories of sound that a consumer may want. The device by itself, once it's working, could be something else completely. And if we want that to happen, then we must have a software interface that can help users train the device on their own without it coming back to the developers. That is the next stage where we try to understand how many people we can give it out to and what their use cases are. For Vibe, it's easier to collect data. Professor Prabhakar could send someone to the busy road and say, collect the sound of car horns. But how do you collect data for persons with motor impairment from persons with motor impairment? That's a fundamental ethical challenge his team has faced in developing iGest. As he says, I feel very guilty about sending people out to collect data from people with motor impairments when it's already hard for them, and say, please give me this data and in some time I'll give you this wonderful device. To that end, I'm always literally hamstrung with iGest, even though this device is closer to my heart and we had started working on it much before Vibe. It's harder for us to collect gesture data from persons with motor impairments, so we are trying different things. For example, they are trying to build a robotic arm that can wear iGest. Controlling the robotic arm on one side, the Create team can then use the wearable device to collect data of how it's moving, match them up, and see if they are training it correctly. Data collected using this method won't be as good as data collected from humans. But at least in terms of not making a nuisance of ourselves before we have some maturity of the algorithms, I'm sort of inclined to do that. Also, the pandemic was really not a nice time to be collecting data from persons with cerebral palsy. So a lot of that has also hamstrung us, and I'm hoping we solve that, says Professor Prabhakar. Affordability is also a key consideration. His first product for Vidyasagar, Aditi, was sold for $10, nearly 750 rupees. Today it's a little more expensive, but we still sell it for 750 rupees. Affordability is a key aspect of such innovations. Take a look at what we are doing with Vibe and iGest. Imported devices cannot be afforded by most people. The cost of the product is kept under 5,000 rupees. The advance of technology and the advent and availability of low-cost microcontrollers and sensors allows us to come up with this unique low-cost device, he explains. Innovation Ecosystem for Assistive Technology. Professor Prabhakar believes that the innovation ecosystem for assistive technology is definitely scaling up if you look at the number of startups and ideas coming up in this space. For instance, Atypical Advantage and NeoMotion that were featured in popular reality TV programs like Shark Tank India. Startups like these are getting us more visibility. And more visibility means that more people are aware of them, there is more interest, and there is more funding. It's all building up in a good manner. But I think there are still enough challenges like the ones that I've spoken of earlier. How do you collect data? What is consent? How do you manage these things a little better? He says. Recently, there was a presentation at the Speech and Hearing Conference where the Department of Science and Technology spoke about many of their devices, including Vibe and iGest. This raises the general awareness surrounding such innovations, and a rising tide floats all boats. Growing general awareness means that it helps in getting more people attuned to this idea of an inclusive society. When we talk of hearing impairment, it's not necessarily someone with a disability. It could be someone who is elderly, right? My father, for example, has been hard of hearing for about 20 years. He wants to cross the road but can't hear the horns. That problem also plagued my grandfather, and it will plague every one of us, says Professor Prabhakar. Talking of iGest, the hope is that as Indians build more wearables for sports, innovators like Professor Prabhakar will use that same technology also to make it work for iGest, or the other way around, where he will use the technology that he developed for iGest and help someone build a better wearable smartwatch. Things or processes like that, I think, help raise awareness and inclusion across the board, he adds. Government policy driving innovation in the field. One element that Professor Prabhakar believes may facilitate the growth of assistive technologies in India is government policy, particularly in the education sector. Take the example of the Draft National Education Policy 2016 that has made schools inclusive, which means these children with disabilities started coming into schools, resulting in greater demand. And that happened 6-7 years ago. Today they are enrolling into institutions of higher education and there's now demand for a lot of services there, says the professor. NEP 2020 also lays emphasis on socio-economically disadvantaged groups. A lot of the policies are in place to enable universities and schools to provide an inclusive classroom and educational experience. I think the starting point was the fact that we made our schools inclusive. And the minute you make your schools inclusive, you don't need rocket science to predict what will happen. The aim is to make these classrooms more inclusive. With that, of course, comes a whole ecosystem of more student projects, startups coming out, funding, greater incubation, and higher venture capital funding. I think there has been overall growth in the area, he adds. In other words, policy initiatives by the government results in a positive cascading effect. Institutional support for innovation. When Professor Prabhakar began this journey into assistive technologies, he had interacted with Professor Anupam Basu of IIT Kharagpur and Professor Balakrishnan of IIT Delhi. We had come together sometime around 2010 and began brainstorming about how to solve this problem for persons with disabilities. We had this problem of scattered demand, very complex issues of multiple disabilities across geographies, and there was no real funding. So each of us decided that we will try to do what we can individually, recalls the professor. In IIT Delhi, they managed to get funds from Wellcome Trust. IIT Kharagpur partnered with West Bengal Electronics and Institute of Cerebral Palsy. IIT Madras partnered with Vidyasagar and Spaston. Professor Prabhakar wrote small-time project proposals and raised money. That was the genesis of Center for Rehabilitation Engineering and Assistive Technology, or CREATE. In my original dream, all universities would have a CREATE lab, where the center looks to address two questions. How do you make your own environment inclusive? How do you act as a beacon to anybody else who wants to make society inclusive? He notes. This is not a problem that can be solved by just one center sitting in one corner of India. It has to be a movement, a pan-India movement that addresses both these questions. How do you make your education system fully inclusive at all levels? How do you act as a beacon for people who want to come together and make an inclusive society? To that extent, CREATE has served its purpose, to some extent. At least in our geography, we have managed to do quite a bit, he notes. Having said that, this space of assistive devices is still at a very nascent stage. It's still a hard place for startups to survive because there is not enough money in there. And, more importantly, most startups will have a 4 or 5 year horizon before their investors expect rewards. Honestly, I don't think it's easy in this space. If you start thinking about it, you have to provide a place to nurture these pre-startup ideas, take them through the paths of trial and error and understanding disability. He continues. Nobody understands disability. Our education system doesn't train us to understand human physiology, let alone disability. The engineering curriculum does not even take us to physiology. We left biology in high school. We need to have these centers to handhold engineers. They need to understand what causes blindness or deafness, what autism is, etc. The engineers need a space to learn these things and be guided through the process. These centers provide that nurturing space, he adds. One very good example of how centers like CREATE have not only fostered innovation, but also nurtured them towards commercialization is Yali Mobility, an IITM incubated company founded by Professor Prabhakar, Pradeep Tangappan and Shivam Shaktivel. The startup focuses on delivering affordable solutions for the person with locomotor disabilities. Among other things, it makes electric three-wheelers for wheelchair users. If you look on the roads, you will see these modified scooters with two wheels in the back and someone usually hanging on to a crutch. If you are a wheelchair user, you can't even use that vehicle. You usually rely on someone to carry you into an auto rickshaw or a car, folding your wheelchair and putting it back, etc. Now let's imagine that you want the person to be independent. What Yali does is to create a ramp on the backside of the electric vehicle. So wheelchair user can just roll their wheelchair into the vehicle. The ramp will close and then they can drive it on the road, says Professor Prabhakar. IIT Madras as a hub for innovation. There are many higher education institutions in India that are flexible and open to what the faculty members do, and they encourage their students as well. But there is something different about IIT Madras. It has a center for innovation which the students run and they do their own thing. Sometimes the projects they pick will overlap with Create and sometimes they won't. They also have an incubation cell located at the IIT Madras Research Park, which has spawned many startups. If we find that the projects overlap with Create, then somebody will reach out to us and ask for assistance. There is immense institutional support. We have been doing this for a long time. But it's only when we established the IIT Madras Research Park in 2009 that it took on a different level, because now we are working closely with industry, financiers, and a large number of engineers. The research park hosts thousands of engineers, says the professor. He explains further. So we can call on these engineers in many ways and try to see if they can help us solve certain problems. Meanwhile, in a formal academic setting, the institute has encouraged us to set up a minor course in assistive technologies. If a student is interested in learning more about these things, they can take a couple of courses and get a minor in them. If you do want to put on a number on IIT Madras's contribution to the innovation and startup ecosystem in India, here is what you can say. The IIT Madras Incubation Cell, which lies in a sprawling 11.5 acres IIT Madras Research Park, has so far spawned 300 odd startups, whose collective valuation is just a little under 40,000 crore rupees. These startups, which include known names such as Ather Energy, Agnikul Cosmos, and the unicorn Unifor, have raised 9,500 crore rupees of funds and generated 1,300 patents. The cell has 1% stake across the startups. It's imperative to remember that both the IIT Madras Research Park and IIT Madras Incubation Cell are Section 8 companies, which means that all the profits will be used to drive more research and innovation and will not be divided among shareholders. Institutional support is at an all-time high, and I say this not just for IIT Madras. Many institutions of higher education have an incubation support system, Professor Prabhakar notes. However, what is missing is the focus on assistive technologies. We have got requests from Odisha, but it's hard for us to support someone there. Assistive technology is an area where a large amount of individual support is required. To that extent, I think we should focus on some fraction of our incubation attention on assistive devices. That's absolutely needed. I would really like it if every institution would say, we will bring out one product every 3 years. Imagine if we can build one assistive technology product every 3 years, but this is being done across 100 institutions. You are getting 30 products a year, right? That's immense, and it will change our society for the better, says Professor Prabhakar. Part 2. A solution for farmers that creates entrepreneurs. Studying engineering at the Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai, Vaibhav Tirke was part of a research group that taught him how engineering and science can be deployed for solving social problems. In 2008, he laid the foundation of an organization that would work to benefit society, in particular farmers and the food industry. He was still in his final year at college. His organization, formed with help from friends, peers, and professors, was christened Science for Society, or S4S Technologies. My professor was working in the space of chemical engineering technology deployed at an industrial scale. That's when we started thinking about deploying such technology to help farmers. So it's a perfect combination of understanding engineering on one side and the problems society faces on the other. That's where our name Science for Society came from, recalls Vaibhav. That organization would soon become a startup developing solar conduction dryer, or SCD, a solar-powered food dehydrator that reduces moisture content in agro-produce, preserving them for up to 1 year without using any chemicals and preservatives. The impact of this technology on farmers, farm laborers, entrepreneurs, and the food industry has been immense. Thanks to our patented technology, farmers don't have to worry about their produce going bad. We have installed it in different parts of India and other countries like France, Jamaica, Nepal, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Kenya, Bangladesh, and India. Currently, we create procurement centers at a village level where farmers can come and sell any grade of produce, including leftover produce. Once the procurement is done, we have a set of women farmers entrepreneurs who convert this agri-produce into processed food, he says. To assist these women entrepreneurs, S4S Technologies has developed and patented these solar dehydration systems. For farmers and entrepreneurs, the benefits are as follows. Number 1. It generates livelihood for women in rural settings. They can earn somewhere between 50,000 rupees and 1 lakh rupees per year. How? Operating a machine like the SCD needs skill. So we train local women and help them become micro-entrepreneurs. Next, we lease out our SCD to our micro-entrepreneurs to dry out the food. Then we simply buy back the preserved food so that these women can make a profit, says Vaibhav. Number 2. These women get access to technologies and businesses which they often cannot because they don't have the requisite finance, technological assets or training. So we provide linkages to banks like State Bank of India, Maharashtra Gramin Bank and NABARD for financing. We help them by providing the right hardware and training so that they become eligible to do these businesses, he adds. Number 3. Speaking about the impact of his technology on farmers, Vaibhav says, the benefit is that they can sell all kinds of produce and even those that often end up as post-harvest loss. We process this produce at the farm gate and cut down on logistic cost, and post-harvest losses are also saved. We have seen around 15% to 25% improvement in profits for farmers. How do solar dryers operate? If you look at food processing, it's basically about increasing the shelf life of food. There are a couple of ways to do this. You can put it in a fridge or a freezer to extend its shelf life. The other way is to dehydrate it by drying under the sun. However, not all types of fruits or vegetables can be saved by this method of drying under open sun. You need dehydration equipment. The principle of our solar-powered food dehydrator is to take out water so that microorganisms cannot grow. And if microorganisms cannot grow, food can be preserved, says Vaibhav. He adds, that's the simple principle. But the challenge is you have to maintain nutrition, food safety, and at the same time, you have to increase the shelf life of food products. So rehydration comes into the picture where fruits and vegetables can be washed, cut, and dried under solar dehydration units. Once done, the shelf life can be increased up to 1 year. Major challenges in developing technology. This is where the interesting matrix of university, students, and the startup world come into the picture. S4S started working on developing a solar dehydrator with the help of a state-funded project. The idea was to look at designs that are available and how they can deploy them for Indian farms. Most of these technologies have been developed in Europe and the US over a long time, and those were deployed in India without taking into account the local context. The Indian context is different. Most farmers have small land holdings and electricity is not regularly available. Another key insight we found once we started refining this technology was that it would be used by women. While men are the decision makers who provide finance, women are the users. The question was, how do we give more agency to women? Vaibhav shares. Secondly, the technology had to operate in areas when even single-phase electricity was a problem. Thirdly, the machine had to be simple enough so that if something went wrong, it could be maintained at a farm level. The machine that we developed is a United Nations award-winning technology, patented and also one of the most efficient. It's still the cheapest. Just to give a context, our technology costs 3 times less in terms of capital cost as compared to industrial dryers. We consume only 5% energy, while having 100% effect as compared to traditional dryers. On top of this, we can use the same machine for fruits, vegetables, spices, milk and wet grain processing, claims Vaibhav. Overcoming challenges. When we realized that our user is a rural woman, we interviewed almost 500 women farmers. We put our machine through an exhibition pilot demo and got feedback from them to see what their needs are. I also found that if I had to see women as a decision maker, she should not depend on a man to make a decision, says Vaibhav. He adds, we created financial mechanisms with banks where women really don't have to put anything on a mortgage for a loan. We helped them set up their bank accounts and created systems where they can get these assets financed. On the design side, it's a fundamental chemical engineering innovation that S4S developed, combining 3 modes of heat transfer. On the maintenance side, S4S industrially designed a product so that it doesn't fail on the ground. 2 key players which supported S4S, particularly in the initial stages, were the Institute of Chemical Technology and the Center for Innovation, Incubation and Entrepreneurship, CIIE, a startup incubation center at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. In the early days, major organizations like Bayer, now Covestro, USAID and FICCI also provided direct funding to bring SCD from laboratory to field. Bayer, a German company, helped in terms of funding, exposure to various materials so that we can improve our abilities. Some of the investors like Factor E Ventures of the USA, Acumen Fund, Chirate Ventures, Global Innovation Fund of the UK, helped in terms of taking business from early stage to a much advanced stage. Each player has a different role, says Vaibhav. Early investors, funders and foundations helped us in taking that extra risk. For example, we worked with Shell Foundation, FICCI and Gates Foundation, who took the early risk of piloting, creating data and support systems. Others like Marico Innovation Foundation created support systems for us to see how this innovation can be scaled. Funders and venture capitalists assisted with early risk capital to pilot this technology. He adds, having said all that, innovators often struggle to access a lot of these support systems. How did S4S get access? There are ample opportunities. You go to conferences, meet people, look up on different websites, do partnerships calls like customer calls. We found the entire process to be very organic, says Vaibhav. It may take a couple of meetings, but I think perseverance of the team, co-founders and management team is critical to frame these partnerships. Whether it's banks, investors, or foundations, it's all about following up religiously, and that takes perseverance. It's about constantly meeting and telling people to come and see what we are building. Of course, this process is difficult and takes a long time, but it can happen. He adds, major advancements in Indian agri-tech. The Indian agri-tech sector is a fast evolving space. As Vaibhav illustrates, we have a large market of about $500 billion in terms of market size of food and over $200 million market size of processed food. Hundreds of unicorns can survive this market. Market size is not a problem and number of users is not a problem since we are talking about a customer base of 150 million farmers. But the questions we need to ask is how do you crack these business models in a more sustainable and profitable way, which will sustain for the long run of 5 to 7 years and can allow investors to exit while also helping your organization achieve long-term sustainable growth. Both dimensions are critically important. Cracking the right business model that creates a win-win situation for farmers and the company is a critical piece that most entrepreneurs are solving. He adds, from innovation to commercialization. If you look at market linkages, food processing equipment and farm services space, Vaibhav still believes that there is a puzzle to be solved when addressing the science and technology requirements for smallholder farmers. That's a critical space where universities, governments, foundations, and charity money has to go in order to create those fundamental technologies and make them available for all, particularly farmers with small land holdings, says Vaibhav. For example, how do we develop a smarter harvester? How do we create a sound business model for smallholder farmers? How can they have efficient food processing? How can we help them with better logistics and food storage capabilities? The objective is to integrate those technological innovations along with the right financial and digital solutions. You will also see emerging spaces in this industry like alternate protein, milk-based products, food processing, and biotechnology. These are all evolving spaces and the fundamental pieces of scientific knowledge which will give Indian startups a higher advantage so that they grow, he says. Part 3. Transforming Public Urinals. When Mohan Kulkarni started Rutu Biosystems in 2007, his aim was simple: to focus on odor management and sanitation. He had developed a technology to neutralize odor in garbage dumping grounds. When we realized that this technology is a success and odor can be managed using such biological products, he started exploring other avenues where odor is a problem. And that's how we encountered public urinals, where even after flushing thousands of liters of water, the odor still persisted and hygiene remained a problem. It was sometime around 2012 when we started working on this problem, and we actually commercialized it around 2019-20, says Mohan's son Kedar Kulkarni, a biotechnology graduate and co-founder. Our technology consists of 3 solutions that work together: a washroom cleaner, a urinal screen, and BioBlock, and an odor controller. The basic components of these products are bacteria and enzymes. These bacteria, typically belonging to the Bacillus family, are found everywhere in nature. We extract and use them in our products, says Kedar. The bacteria and active enzymes present in the BioBlock and cleaner react with the uric salts and produce nitrogen instead of ammonia, which causes no stench in the urinals. This not only helps to maintain cleanliness and sanitation, but also saves water. Kedar adds, what makes our technology different is its ease of installation. Once the products are installed in a public place, we provide training to janitors to familiarize them with the technology. Apart from that, there is no need for extra assistance. The bioblocks are simply placed on the urinals. We transform existing urinals into eco-friendly ones just by replacing their products with our patented products. Our customers don't spend much to make this change. However, the process from inception of idea to commercialization took Kedar and his father Mohan a good 7 years. A majority of the time went in identifying the problem, how it can be solved scientifically, developing products around that problem, testing them, taking user trials, and validating the results. Why did it take 7 years though? Convincing the masses. See, for the entire waterless and odorless urinal program to materialize, it took 7 years, although we had already launched it in bits and pieces. For example, the washroom cleaner was the first product that we launched. We were already selling it to consumers as a green alternative to conventional cleaners, acids, etc. But to get the whole bundle of products together and to get people to accept them took time. Back in 2015-16, when we started talking to people about waterless urinals, people were not even ready to listen to such proposals, says Kedar. What makes the growth of Rutu Biosystems particularly interesting is the lack of any external, institutional or infrastructural support for developing and commercializing this solution. We have remained a bootstrapped venture from day one. The crux of the situation is that when you are in a small-scale startup, particularly working in a new industry trying to create a category of sorts, the main concern is getting to know or identifying people who can be potential users of the product, talking to them and convincing them to try the product, explains Kedar. Rutu Biosystems have taken the long and hard route of creating awareness among consumers, educating them as to what the problem actually is and how it can be solved. We have developed our own sales team where we collaborate with organizations at their environment, health and safety or EHS levels. Make them understand what kind of products can be used in their facilities, how they are going to help them solve their hygiene problems and save water, says Kedar. In the early days and even today, the major difficulty or roadblock they faced was the lack of awareness among consumers. For example, when we approach an EHS manager in a large organization to talk about waterless urinals, they often ask how urinals can work without water. Our first major roadblock is convincing the EHS manager that they can save water in their washrooms. Since it's a new concept, we have to give demonstrations. The next challenge that comes is training the janitors who have been used to using some category of products for a number of years, notes Kedar. Rutu Biosystems trains them, sensitizes them as to why they are using this method and how these products will positively impact their health and benefit them as well. Today, they are dealing with industries, corporations, public places like schools, colleges, airports, hospitals, and basically anywhere where there are more than 50 to 100 urinals and more than 1,000 people using them daily. That is their target group. We started this product line in Pune just before the first lockdown started in 2020. If you look at it today, most of our customers are in Maharashtra, but now we are also expanding to Karnataka, Delhi, and a few other metro cities this year, claims Kedar. No institutional support. As a bootstrapped company, Rutu Biosystems didn't have any access to any external funding. So how did they manage that cash flow? Like any good business, they built a line of other products that took off in the market before turning their attention to public urinals. With regards to the garbage odor control solution, we have been working with multiple municipal corporations to supply the product back to garbage dumping grounds. That was a good source of income for us. Similarly, we have launched other products as well in different categories. We have products for converting septic tanks to biodigesters without any additional capital expenditure or the need for retrofitting. We also have products for oil and grease treatment and home care. Putting out diversified products gave us some freedom to engage in R&D to develop this solution that we are currently driving with 100% focus, explains Kedar. Supporting innovators and entrepreneurs in the sanitation industry. As an entrepreneur and innovator who has gone through this entire process, what kind of support system does Kedar feel is required in India? A major hurdle that any innovator can face is access to funds. Fortunately, today we have many incubation centers in the country. There are premier organizations like the IITs who are offering incubation to early stage startups with good ideas that can potentially create impact, he says. The second is access to mentorship. As an innovator or entrepreneur, not everybody has the necessary vision to create a business. For example, even my father and I are hardcore technocrats, so it took us time to even get the business logic or the business part in place. That kind of mentorship is also required, he adds. Today, Rutu Biosystems has installed solutions in approximately 10,000 urinals. And from April 2022 to January 2023, our technology has helped save approximately 8 crore liters of water, claims Kedar. What more can India do to promote such innovations? The solution, Kedar argues, starts in school. We must give children the freedom to think freely, identify problems and find solutions. In my opinion, today's education system lacks a basic problem-solving attitude that any innovator will need throughout their entrepreneurial journey. Running a business is like solving one problem after the other. And that problem can be technical, financial, or something as simple as trying to retain a customer. People need to learn how to solve problems, and for that you need some freedom of thought right from your childhood, he argues. In terms of R&D support, if a young innovator has identified a problem and they want to work a solution around it, there are facilities available to build on that. Plus, we need more funding, which can be made available to early-stage startups, particularly those working in climate change, green energy, sanitation, and water management. Today, more or less, all VCs are going for D2C startups, the glamorous businesses. The not-so-glamorous ones, which actually create impact, must be identified and brought to center stage, he adds. Meanwhile, Kedar shares that their venture's target is to convert 50,000 more urinals to waterless urinals by the end of 2023. We always aim to dig deeper into the problem and provide a solution instead of just masking it, he says. Lessons learned. Going through the remarkable journey of these entrepreneurs, here are 6 things we learned. Number 1. Empathy can drive innovation. Empathy is the single most overlooked ingredient of innovation. Being able to accurately imagine what someone else is thinking and feeling allows innovators to better understand their target group's needs. We have seen this not only through the innovators described, but in some of the most path-breaking innovations in history. Number 2. Institutional support to foster an ecosystem of innovation. The example of IIT Madras should leave no doubt that institutional support is fundamental to fostering an ecosystem where innovation is not just encouraged but taken to a stage where it touches the lives of many. Number 3. Innovation must be affordable. In all the examples cited here, we can see the emphasis on affordability. After all, affordability creates accessibility. If you want your innovation to reach a large audience, make sure it's affordable. That is certain to create impact. Number 4. Smart business decisions can bring innovations to life. In a scenario where access to funding is limited, the Rutu Biosystems clearly showed how they were able to commercialize their solution for odorless and waterless urinals because of smart business strategies. Number 5. Create incubation centers at schools. Why leave them to institutions of higher education? Why not foster a spirit of innovation and problem solving by setting up incubation centers in schools? Besides the off chance that students come up with a fantastic startup idea, it will create a culture of innovation where children take pride in coming up with solutions for major problems. Number 6. Innovation is thriving in urban India. The past decade has seen a spate of startups in urban India looking to solve some of the country's most pressing concerns. With better access to funding, mentorship, and institutional support, this has only improved. This can happen for rural India too, but a lot more needs to happen from a government policy side to improve things. Igniting Ideas for Impact is an audiobook published by the Better India in association with Accenture India. Find out more about Accenture India's initiatives at www.accenture.com/in-en. Author Rinchen Norbu Wangchuk. Edited by Divya Setu and Tanya Singh.